Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this built-in expectation of, well, precision. You break your arm, you get an x-ray, and there's that jagged white line. The doctor points right to the fracture, and the path forward is just totally clear. Right, you cast it, let it heal, and move on. It's a very binary, visible reality. And I think, honestly, we find a lot of comfort in that visibility. The human brain just craves categorization.
Exactly. If a problem can be neatly boxed up and labeled, the solutions feel manageable. It doesn't even matter how painful the actual injury is as long as it's straightforward.
But the moment you step into the world of chronic illness or neurodevelopmental conditions, and especially systemic bureaucracy, that whole metaphorical X-ray machine just completely shatters.
Yeah, it really does. We aren't looking at clean lines anymore.
Mm.
We are navigating a diagnostic and social landscape that is, well, it's entirely murky. The symptoms just blur right into side effects. And the medical trauma gets compounded by this intense administrative exhaustion, which is exactly what today's source materials pull us directly into. We are looking at a highly specific, deeply personal archive today.
Right, we've got draft legal claims, personal emails, open letters to tech companies, and just a massive array of social media posts. And every single document in this stack was authored by one person.
Yes, Asaf Benyamini. He's a 53-year-old Israeli man living in Jerusalem. And this collection, I mean, it functions as way more than just a biography.
Oh, absolutely. It's this meticulously detailed map of how a vulnerable individual actually collides with massive, just totally indifferent systems.
So for anyone listening right now who has ever felt their blood pressure spike while navigating, a labyrinthine automated phone system, or if you've been demanded to submit the exact same PDF to a government agency for like the fourth time.
Oh, I hate that so much.
Right. Well, ASOS perspective is going to radically alter how you understand those exact moments. Our core mission for this deep dive is to trace his decades-long pursuit of disability rights in Israel.
And we're also going to unpack his conceptual framework for a fixed income for all citizens. Plus, and I think this is the most fascinating part, we're going to dissect his philosophy on bureaucracy.
Yeah, he really doesn't view red tape as just some byproduct of poor government planning. He defines it as a weaponized, deliberate cognitive barrier.
It's a heavy topic. And before we really get into it, we do need to establish some parameters for this discussion.
Definitely. Because Asaf's writings do heavily feature politically charged material. He critiques Israeli domestic policy, historical military actions, and international geopolitics.
Right, so we want to be very clear with you listening. We are here solely to impartially report the contents of his writings. We are not endorsing or validating or taking sides on any of the geopolitical or historical viewpoints he presents.
Exactly. Our objective is just to faithfully convey the architecture of his worldview exactly as he constructed it in the source texts we have.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really comprehend his philosophy on systems, I feel like we first have to ground ourselves in the sheer physical reality of his existence.
We do, because the conceptual ideas he pitches and the structural critiques he levels at the government, they are entirely born from the friction of his daily life.
According to the documents, he lives at the Avivat Hostel, which is operated by the Reut Association in the Kiryat Menachem neighborhood of Jerusalem. But he actually refers to this as a secret home.
Yeah, a secret home. And that living situation was necessitated by what he describes as unhandled police complaints regarding harassment. So right from the start, there's this profound lack of safety and stability.
And he's navigating all of this as a single 53-year-old man. The clearest window we actually have into his physical baseline comes from a draft of a civil lawsuit he prepared.
Right. He drafted this claim seeking damages. I believe it was no less than 50,000 new Israeli shekels against an unnamed defendant. And this was for an incident that aggravated his pre-existing conditions.
And I just have to say, the list of those pre-existing conditions is absolutely staggering. It reads like a medical encyclopedia of compounding ailments.
It really does. He details living with obsessive compulsive disorder and schizoaffective disorder. And I mean, those alone require immense cognitive energy just to manage on a daily basis.
Yeah, just the mental toll of that is huge. But then you layer on the physical deterioration. He has psoriatic arthritis, which causes severe joint pain and stiffness.
And a chronic disc herniation at the L4-5 vertebrae. We should probably pause on that for a second because the L4-5 herniation is really critical to understand here.
Right, because that specific area of the lower spine controls the nerves radiating down through the legs. So he specifically notes that this causes radiating pain and severely limits his ability to even just walk or stand.
Which is debilitating on its own. But then the cascade continues into neurological symptoms. He describes chronic dizziness, recurring numbness, balance issues, and a frequent loss of motor control.
which results in him just dropping objects unexpectedly. And if that wasn't enough, add irritable bowel syndrome, cardiological issues presenting as chest pains and breathing difficulties, a significant weakening of his vision, and an anal fissure.
It's an overwhelming physical burden. Managing just one of those conditions alters the entire trajectory of a person's life. But managing all of them simultaneously, that requires a pharmaceutical regimen that is effectively a full-time job.
It really is. He documents his daily intake, and it's intense. He's on 600 milligrams of Seroquel.
That is a very substantial dose. For context, that's an atypical antipsychotic, and it carries incredibly heavy sedative and metabolic effects.
Wow. And he also takes Tegretol CR, which is an anticonvulsant and mood stabilizer, at 400 milligrams twice a day, plus Effexor, an SNRI antidepressant, at 150 milligrams twice a day.
And the interaction of all those psychiatric medications often creates severe gastrointestinal issues, which totally explains the next items on his list, which are Levolac and Laxin Forte.
Right, and he's taken the Laxin Forte at an incredibly high dose of 1,800 milligrams, alongside B12 and D vitamins.
He does note that he is closely monitored by his physician, Dr. Brandon Stewart at Collit Health Services, but still, the sheer chemical load on his system every single day is immense.
I was trying to think of a way to picture this. If you think about your own baseline daily routine, waking up, making coffee, getting to work.
Just normal, everyday stuff.
Yeah. Now imagine your baseline requires calibrating this massive, delicate control panel just to achieve a minimal state of functioning.
That's a really good analogy.
Right. The medications have to balance the psychiatric symptoms without exacerbating the physical lethargy. The pain management has to navigate the gastrointestinal distress. Every single dial on that panel must be perfectly tuned.
And then an external incident occurs, which is the basis of this lawsuit draft, and someone essentially smashes a hammer onto that control panel.
Exactly. The legal draft functions as this stark autobiography of a system under constant siege. It uses all that dry legal phrasing required for a tort claim, like outlining loss of amenities and aggravation of pre-existing state.
But that formal language actually strips away the abstraction. It forces whoever reads it to confront how a disruption that might be a minor inconvenience to an able-bodied person sends these massive shockwaves through a fragile ecosystem of survival.
But here's the thing. The physical burden is really only the prologue here. The core of his struggle emerges when this fragile physical ecosystem is forced to interact with the economy.
And the administrative machine. A machine that constantly demands a standard level of able-bodied performance just to participate in society.
We see this play out in these mundane, just heartbreaking micro-frictions. For example, let's look at the email regarding his checkbook.
Right, he reaches out to this tech-focused Facebook group with what seems like a simple problem. His motor skills are failing, which is a direct manifestation of the neurological issues and arthritis we just talked about.
So the physical act of just holding a pen and writing out a standard bank check has become nearly impossible for him.
So he asks the community if there is any automated device or some software that can physically fill out standard checkbooks for him.
And then there is the long-handled roller device. He purchases this assistive tool that is designed to help people with limited reach, but the product lacks accessible instructions.
So he's forced to write an email offering to hire someone to produce a private Hebrew language training video just to figure out how to operate a piece of plastic safely.
And he even adds this caveat promising he won't upload the video anywhere. He says he just needs it for his own private use.
That detail, about keeping it private, it speaks volumes. It highlights the vulnerability and the sheer indignity of having to broadcast your physical limitations to total strangers just to get basic instructions.
Every single task requires a bespoke workaround, and every workaround carries this hidden tax.
Yeah, a tax of time, a tax of dignity, and almost always a tax of money, which becomes glaringly obvious in his correspondence with Dagesh Assistive Technology.
Right, so he contacts them, hoping to find a solution for his deteriorating handwriting, and they reply by offering a technology matching meeting.
Now, in a functioning support system, a technology matching meeting sounds like the exact intervention required, right?
It sounds perfect. But the conditions attached to this meeting transform it into an impenetrable fortress. They inform him the meeting will cost 500 new Israeli shekels.
Which is a huge barrier. But then they also require the meeting to take place in their offices, which means he has to travel.
And it gets worse. They mandate that he bring a family member and a paramedical professional, like an occupational therapist, to accompany him.
Asaf's written response to these demands is just, it distills his entire socioeconomic reality into a few sentences. He informs them that his sole income is a disability pension from the National Insurance Institute.
So he states plainly that he cannot afford 500 shekels. He explains that his physical disabilities severely limit his mobility, making the journey to their office impossible.
And finally, he writes that he has no relatives who would agree to accompany him.
The irony is just suffocating. The very tools engineered to bridge the gap for disabled individuals are locked behind the exact barriers that disabled individuals are most likely to lack.
Disposable income, physical mobility, robust social support networks. If you don't have those, you can't get the help.
How do you survive when the lifeline thrown to you is literally too heavy to lift?
Well, Asaf's reaction to this catch-22 is what elevates these documents from just a personal diary of hardship into a really profound structural critique.
Right, because he scales the frustration of that 500 shekel meeting into a macroeconomic thesis. In his writings, he frequently references the economic model of a fixed income for every citizen.
Which is commonly known as universal basic income. And he points out that the state of Israel currently fails to provide the sick and disabled with a minimum existence with dignity.
The disability pension is simply insufficient to cover all those hidden taxes of living in a disabled body that we just talked about.
So he conceptualizes a universal fixed income not as some piece of utopian economic philosophy, but as a dire medical and social necessity.
Because when a government relies on means-tested welfare, every single benefit requires an application, an evaluation, a matching meeting, an approval process.
Exactly. If the state refuses to dismantle that granular gatekeeping, if they won't intervene when a company demands 500 shekels for an accessibility consultation, then the only structural bypass is to provide a baseline, unconditional income.
Because capital provides agency. If you just give people the funds directly, they can bypass the bureaucratic gatekeepers and solve their own microfrictions.
And he's been actively campaigning for this kind of structural dignity since at least 2007. There's an open letter seeking sponsors and a pitch to a Movie House Facebook group where he outlines his advocacy for housing, medication, and rent assistance.
He specifically notes that rent assistance programs haven't been adequately updated in years, which just leaves the disabled completely priced out of a dignified existence.
So he is literally pleading with film producers, directors, and journalists to document this systemic failure. He understands the mechanics of social change.
Yeah, he knows that without a documentary or some massive PR campaign, his struggle just remains completely invisible.
But here, the catch-22 tightens its grip again. He needs capital to fund the awareness campaign that would force the government to provide the capital he needs to survive.
He is trapped in poverty by the very system he is trying to expose, which forces us to ask the question Asaf is obsessively trying to answer: why is this system built this way?
Why is it so incredibly difficult to get just basic assistance? And Asaf arrives at a pretty chilling conclusion. He stops operating under the assumption that the system is broken.
Right. He begins analyzing the system under the premise that it is functioning flawlessly, exactly as it was designed to.
This brings us to the most fascinating conceptual framework in the entire archive, I think. His idea of the bureaucracy wall.
Let's look at his interaction with the National Insurance Institute, the NII. He desperately needs the Sharam benefit.
And for context for you listening, Sharam stands for Special Services. It's a specific benefit designed for individuals who require assistance with the basic activities of daily living.
Things like washing dishes, preparing food, hanging laundry, or simply getting out of bed, which, given his medical profile, is a vital necessity.
But when he attempts to secure this benefit, he doesn't even receive a rejection. A rejection would at least be a tangible decision he could appeal.
Instead, he experiences complete institutional ghosting. He is just ignored. So seeking recourse, he files a complaint with the state controller,
which initiates a sequence of events that honestly borders on the surreal. An employee from the controller's office eventually calls him back. However, the call comes from a blocked, unlisted number.
And the employee simply instructs Asaf to call the main NII hotline to check the status of his Sharam application and to report back in 2 weeks.
Let's just trace the mechanics of this communication loop for a second. The controller, acting as the oversight authority, calls from an untraceable number.
Meaning Asaf literally cannot initiate a follow-up.
Right. And when Asaf calls the NII hotline exactly as instructed, he discovers it isn't actually a direct line to the NII, it's an outsourced external messaging center.
The operators there cannot access his file. They can only take a message and forward it to the actual government employees.
Who, of course, never return the call. So an oversight official you cannot call back tells you to call a hotline that cannot help you, to leave a message for a department that refuses to answer.
All regarding a lifeline benefit you desperately need to survive. It is a perfectly engineered closed loop of absolute nothingness.
And Asaf dissects this dynamic through a really brilliant linguistic lens. He examines the root structure of the Hebrew language itself.
Yeah, he points out that the Hebrew word for document mismak and the word for authority samshut both derive from the exact same linguistic root, samak.
Think about the implications of that for you, the listener. The next time you have to verify your identity online or bring 3 forms of proof of address to the DMV, realize what the system is fundamentally communicating.
Asaf argues that when the state demands a document, it is not merely asking for information. It is establishing a baseline accusation. It's saying, we do not believe you. You are a liar until you can produce the paperwork to prove otherwise.
The burden of proof is entirely weaponized. He writes that this entire structure exists to protect the egos of government officials and to codify an unequal power dynamic.
The underlying message of the bureaucracy is basically, we possess the documents, therefore we possess the authority. We are stronger than you and by definition more correct than you.
If you warn us of a systemic failure, we will ignore you. And when that failure inevitably harms you, we will blame your inability to navigate our system.
He actually actively mocks the sanitized corporate language of these institutions. When officials use phrases like, we're sorry you feel that way, he calls it out as manipulative nonsense.
Because they do not regret anything. The system is meticulously designed to protect the authority of the official, completely insulating them from the human reality of the citizen.
And this specific observation leads directly to his essay, The Architecture of Freedom. In it, he outlines his theory of the human DDoS.
I want to spend some time on this because the analogy is incredibly sharp.
Yeah, for anyone unfamiliar with cybersecurity, a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack, is a method used by hackers to take down a website or a server.
They use a network of compromised computers to flood the target server with millions of fake data requests all at once.
The server attempts to process all these fake requests, its memory and processing power max out, and it crashes. Legitimate users can no longer access the site. The system is just paralyzed by sheer volume.
And Asaf argues that modern bureaucracy applies this exact same cyber attack mechanism to the human brain.
It makes so much sense. Our brains have a limited amount of cognitive RAM. We only have so much working memory, processing power, and emotional bandwidth.
And bureaucracy floods marginalized groups with an endless stream of friction. Complex forms requiring medical jargon, automated phone menus with circular logic, blocked numbers.
Kafkaesque technology matching meetings. It creates an artificial cognitive overload. If your entire week is consumed by the sheer mental effort of trying to figure out why your disability check didn't clear.
Or sitting on hold for 4 hours trying to escalate a SHRAM claim.
Right. Your cognitive RAM is entirely depleted. You have zero bandwidth left to read up on policy, to organize with your community, or to protest the conditions of your existence.
It effectively disables the software of social change. You cannot build a revolution when you are drowning in paperwork just to secure your next meal.
When you view bureaucracy through this lens, it ceases to look like incompetence. It looks like a highly optimized suppression tactic.
The complexity is the point. It ensures that those at the margins remain utterly preoccupied with basic survival, preventing any coherent leadership or systemic challenge from emerging from the most vulnerable classes.
It is a really bleak realization. You aren't just slipping through the cracks. The system built the cracks specifically for you to fall into.
But, and this is crucial, Asaf refuses to let the analysis end at victimhood. If the system is a weapon designed to isolate and exhaust, how do you disarm it?
He argues that the countermeasure requires a shift in identity, from being the subject of the bureaucracy to becoming the architect of a new system entirely.
He champions this concept of expertise from experience. He writes that true power and true innovation lie at the margins.
Because the disabled community possesses a unique, highly valuable form of data, they have physically and mentally crashed into the system's failures.
As he beautifully phrases it, they have rubbed against its rusty bolts. They know exactly where the architecture is fundamentally flawed.
Historically, centralized authorities maintained power by hoarding information in physical spaces, filing cabinets, locked offices, inaccessible meetings.
But Asaf recognizes that the digital landscape offers a sovereign space, Disabled individuals are no longer forced to exist merely as isolated medical files sitting in a drawer at the NII.
Through digital networks, they can transition into nodes in a network of knowledge. And he doesn't just theorize about this, he actively attempts to manifest it.
Which is astounding given his constraints. We are talking about a man living in poverty, battling severe chronic pain, relying on automated translation software, and possessing zero formal programming skills.
Yet he is actively conceptualizing tech solutions and formally pitching them to development platforms like levellatchuplife.com. Let's examine the mechanics of his pitches to really understand how he applies his philosophy.
Yeah, let's look at his first pitch. It's an application he calls Food Finder, and he actually managed to build a rudimentary prototype of this using a no-code development platform called uware.com.
No-code platforms are great because they allow users to build applications using visual drag-and-drop interfaces rather than writing raw code, which totally bypasses lack of programming knowledge.
He designed the app to help allergy sufferers locate safe, verified food sources in their specific regions, but he immediately looks past the initial use case.
Right, he pitches the idea that the underlying architecture of this allergy app could be seamlessly adapted to serve other marginalized or specific communities facing dietary restrictions.
Specifically suggesting adaptations for strict Jewish kosher laws, Muslim halal requirements, or vegan diets.
And he explicitly states in his communications that he does not suffer from food allergies himself.
Exactly. He is identifying a systemic friction point for a totally different community and designing a bypass for them.
His second pitch is significantly more complex. It's an AI dementia interface. He envisions an operating system layer for individuals suffering from Alzheimer's or other forms of cognitive decline.
The mechanics of this idea are fascinating. As dementia progresses, the ability to navigate complex digital environments, menus, subfolders, multiple open windows, it just evaporates.
So ASAP proposes an artificial intelligence that learns the user's specific workflow. Then, as the user's cognitive abilities degrade, the AI actively simplifies the operating mechanism.
It might hide unused applications and large core icons or reduce multi-step processes into single clicks.
The goal is to allow the individual to retain access to familiar digital tools and the independence that comes with them for as long as medically possible.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Okay, go for it.
We are looking at a man whose hands shake so badly he can't write a check, who can't secure a basic home help benefit from his own government.
Right.
And he is spending his incredibly limited cognitive RAM designing theoretical AI interfaces for dementia patients, a condition he does not have.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Without the capital to hire developers or the coding skills to build it himself, isn't this just an exercise in futility? How could he possibly execute these visions?
From a purely logistical standpoint, yes, the execution is a massive hurdle. But you have to look at the psychological function of these pitches. This is his direct counteroffensive to the human DDoS.
How so?
The bureaucratic DDoS attack is designed to force you to look inward.
Yeah.
It wants you to obsess over your own missing forms and your own misery until you just crash.
Oh, I see.
By looking outward, by dedicating his cognitive bandwidth to designing solutions for other vulnerable groups, ASAP reclaims his ultimate agency.
He refuses the government's designation of him as a problem to be managed. He claims the identity of the architect.
He is living the mantra he wrote in his essay. We are not victims of bureaucracy. We are the architects of the system that will replace it.
Precisely. And look at the contrast between the system he envisions and the system he lives in. He envisions compassionate automation.
An AI that actively simplifies your computer interface as you lose your cognitive health is the exact inverse of a bureaucratic state that demands more complex documentation as you lose your physical health.
One system adapts to maintain your dignity. The other hardens to accelerate your exclusion.
Compassionate automation versus cruel bureaucracy. It is a stunning vision. And this razor-sharp ability to identify systemic hypocrisy isn't confined just to technology or disability rights.
No, not at all. ASAP applies this exact same critical lens to the broader social, political, and historical world around him.
His social media feeds act as this curated exhibition of human hypocrisy, but also of profound radical empathy. He is constantly scanning the horizon for examples of how power operates.
Let's examine a post he shared by an activist named Alona Allman. It paints a devastating picture of national priorities.
The post describes a homeless man suffering from severe psychiatric issues. He is sleeping on a piece of cardboard in the freezing cold outside a train station in Jerusalem.
When approached, the man acknowledges that both the National Insurance Institute and the local welfare department are fully aware of his situation, yet they do absolutely nothing.
The geography of this post is really what makes it so potent. This man is freezing on the street just a few kilometers away from the Knesset, the Israeli parliament building.
Alman describes the Knesset as a luxurious billion-dollar structure. Inside its climate-controlled halls, well-fed medical professors and politicians are passionately screaming and debating about World Health Organization memberships and global health treaties.
They are entirely consumed by high-level abstract policy debates. Meanwhile, a man with severe psychiatric needs is literally freezing to death on their doorstep.
Asaf elevates this from a sad anecdote to a systemic critique. He comments on the post, stating, "Provide shelter for the homeless, it's not in anyone's interest there."
He is pointing out that the halls of power only engage with issues that generate political capital. Abstract policy debates involve stakeholders, budgets, international prestige, and media coverage.
But the raw, messy human suffering on a piece of cardboard generates zero political capital, so the system renders it invisible.
It is the exact same opacity he experiences with his Shram benefit, just projected onto a national scale. And he also explores this dynamic in a completely different context, the power structures of mental health therapy.
He rates a very sharp critique of mental health professionals who refuse to adjust their treatment strategies. He observes that in a therapeutic dialogue, what is omitted, the silences, the topics the therapist avoids, is often just as critical as what is spoken.
He argues that therapists frequently ignore the shifting realities of their patients because acknowledging those shifts would require the therapist to change course, which requires effort and admits fallibility.
He diagnoses the root cause as ego. He describes therapists who operate under the assumption, I am the professional, I hold the degree, and no patient is going to teach me how to do my job.
Which perfectly mirrors his linguistic analysis of the word document equaling authority. The therapist relies on the authority of their credential, rather than engaging with the complex human reality sitting in front of them.
The credential protects their ego from the messy reality of the patient. It is the exact same unequal power dynamic as the bureaucrat and the citizen.
But Asaf's worldview isn't entirely cynical. He actively hunts for and shares narratives that represent the antithesis of this bureaucratic ego. He collects these almost like parables of true justice.
The story of the Canadian judge is a perfect example of what Asaf considers true justice.
Yeah, he shares a story, which is often circulated online, about an 80-year-old man in Canada who was brought before a judge for stealing food. The man explains he was starving.
The judge looks at him and says, I cannot ignore the law, so I must fine you $10. But as he says it, the judge pulls $10 from his own pocket to pay the fine on behalf of the man.
But the judge doesn't stop there. He turns to the rest of the courtroom and fines every single person in the courtroom $10.
He declares that they are all collectively guilty because they live in a society, in a city, that allows an elderly man to fall so deeply into poverty that he must steal bread to survive.
They collect $480 and hand it to the elderly man. The judge states that a city where leaders and citizens turn a blind eye to that level of inequality has fundamentally lost its right to exist.
Asaf pairs this modern legal parable with a traditional Jewish story, the story of the rabbi with muddy boots.
In this story, set in Eastern Europe, a revered rabbi visits a family's home to teach Torah. Realizing his boots are covered in snow and mud, and not wanting to ruin the family's nice furniture, the rabbi enters quietly through the back door.
The homeowner sees this and is horrified, but not by the mud, by the theological implication.
Right. The homeowner tells the rabbi, by entering through the back to spare my carpets, you are conveying a distorted message. You are implying that my material furniture is more important than the holy Torah you are bringing into this house.
He forces the rabbi to go back outside and march straight through the main entrance, tracking mud across the expensive rugs to physically demonstrate that their spiritual values absolutely supersede their material wealth.
Asaf shares this to lament that this prioritization of core values over material convenience has been completely lost in modern society. We live in a system that protects the furniture, the budgets, the protocols, the billion-dollar Knesset buildings, while actively suppressing human dignity.
When you synthesize these parables, you understand exactly what Asaf is starving for. He is surrounded by institutional opacity and blocked numbers.
He is desperate for leaders who will pay the fine themselves, leaders who will track mud on the carpet for a higher principle, rather than hiding behind the liability protection of a bureaucratic form.
And this intense focus on the crushed versus the powerful on the individual circumventing the cruel machine extends into his analysis of international history and geopolitics.
We are entering the territory of Asaph's historical and political commentary now. As a reminder to you listening, we are analyzing Asaph's interpretation of these events as a reflection of his philosophy. We are strictly reporting his shared content impartially.
Understood. Let's look at the historical figure he highlights. Josette Milan.
She was a French art student, only 20 years old, during the Nazi occupation of France in World War II. She joined the resistance, and her specific skill set is what makes her so relevant to Asaph's worldview.
Because she possessed a sharp artistic eye and incredibly steady hands, she became a master forger.
She meticulously carved rubber stamps out of erasers and linoleum that perfectly mimicked the official eagles and swastikas of the Nazi bureaucracy.
She forged identity cards, ration books, and travel permits that successfully saved the lives of over 1,000 Jewish refugees and Allied pilots.
She was eventually captured by the Gestapo in Lyon and tortured by Klaus Barbie, infamously known as the Butcher of Lyon.
Despite horrific torture, she never revealed a single name. She was deported to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she survived starvation by eating insects and tree bark. She lived to be 100 years old, passing away recently with full military honors.
Why does this specific story resonate so deeply with Asaph? Because Josette Milan is the ultimate anti-bureaucratic architect.
The Nazi regime relied on the most violent, heavily documented bureaucratic machine in human history. Josette looked at that machine, recognized that the system equated documents with authority, and used her own hands to counterfeit that authority.
She bypassed the deadly DDoS attack of the Gestapo with a carved rubber stamp.
He really identifies with those who forge their own tools to subvert unaccountable power. And he takes the same analytical lens and applies it to a much darker, systemic failure involving his own country's history.
The 1976 military coup in Argentina. He shares a detailed post about the Night of the Pencils. This was a horrific operation conducted by the Argentine military junta under Jorge Rafael Videla.
The regime kidnapped, tortured, and disappeared high school students who were protesting for lower bus fares and educational rights.
The post Asaph amplifies details the brutality inside the clandestine torture centers, specifically noting the heavy element of anti-Semitism. Jewish victims were subjected to even more severe targeted torture by the guards.
But Asaph's focus is on the geopolitical hypocrisy surrounding the event. Based on his shared materials, he fiercely criticizes the Israeli government of that era.
He points to historical accounts stating that Israel acted as a major weapons supplier to the Argentine junta, prioritizing realpolitik and arms sales over the desperate pleas from the families of the persecuted Argentine Jews.
And he brings this historical grievance directly into the present day, focusing on the case of a man named Teodoro Aníbal Gauto. Gauto is accused of committing crimes against humanity at La Cacha, one of the notorious concentration camps in Argentina.
The post details that Gauto was located living comfortably in Israel under a new name, Yosef Carmel. The Argentine government requested his extradition to face trial for his alleged crimes.
Asaph claims that the modern Israeli government is actively dragging its feet on this extradition. The Post alleges they were utilizing a technical trap in extradition law to avoid sending him back.
Extradition treaties are incredibly complex bureaucratic documents, often bogged down in the dual criminality principle, statutes of limitations, and citizenship loopholes.
Asaph links to a petition demanding the extradition, seeing this technical trap as the ultimate bureaucratic weapon. When a citizen needs a disability benefit, the bureaucracy crushes them.
But when a state wants to protect a suspected war criminal, that same bureaucracy provides an impenetrable shield of technicalities.
This leads him to a highly cynical, though fiercely argued conclusion about the nature of justice. He writes explicitly that the concept of equal law enforcement is a complete myth.
It does not exist anywhere on Earth. He argues that human nature, and by extension the governments built by humans, will always twist the law to reduce punishments for those in their favored in-group,
while simultaneously aggravating punishments for their opponents or marginalized outgroups.
He concedes that having laws on the books is better than anarchy because it slightly mitigates the gaps, but fundamentally the system will always protect itself first.
Whether it is a parliament ignoring a freezing homeless man, a health ministry ignoring an application for a caregiver, or a state ignoring an international extradition request, the through line is identical.
Authority prioritizing its own preservation over human empathy.
He even extends this deep skepticism of authority to the very technology he hopes will save us. We discussed his vision for AI as compassionate automation, but he is highly engaged with the flaws of current AI.
He regularly comments on geopolitics, using hashtags to criticize the Iranian regime, like hashtag StopIRGC Day 823, and forcefully arguing that denying Jewish indigeneity is essentially anti-Semitism with footnotes.
He demands accuracy and truth, which makes his interaction with ChatGPT so poignant and deeply amusing.
Right. He tests the AI with a basic demographic question. He asks ChatGPT which country in the world has the largest Jewish population.
ChatGPT confidently responds that the United States has the most with roughly 6 million, and Israel is second with roughly 7.5 million.
A catastrophic failure of first-grade arithmetic. 7.5 million is undeniably larger than 6 million.
Asaf points out the mathematical error, the AI dutifully apologizes and corrects itself, and Asaf posts the screenshot of the exchange.
His caption perfectly encapsulates his underlying anxiety. ChatGPT does not know simple arithmetic, so can we really trust artificial intelligence? Food for thought.
So let's pull all these threads together. Over the course of this deep dive, we have charted the incredibly dense, frictional reality of Asaf Benyamini.
We started at the baseline of his physical torment, the compounding effects of Seroquel, neurological decay, and psoriatic arthritis.
We examine his maddening, looped struggle with the National Insurance Institute, revealing a system that demands documentation merely to shift the burden of proof onto the vulnerable.
We explored how he scaled that personal frustration into a structural vision for a fixed universal income, seeking a monetary bypass to institutional humiliation.
And most critically, we unpacked his brilliant conceptualization of bureaucracy as a human DDoS, a deliberate cognitive attack designed to exhaust the RAM of the marginalized.
Through his software pitches, his curation of historical resistance like Josette Mullen, and his demand for international accountability, we see a man who refuses the state's designation of him as merely a broken medical file.
Against overwhelming physical and financial odds, he is striving to act as a social architect.
His archive is a testament to the sheer resilience of the human mind, insisting on its own agency, even as the physical body and the state apparatus both fail it simultaneously.
So to you listening, the next time you find yourself trapped on endless hold by a government agency or staring blankly at a digital form that demands you prove your identity for the 5th time, think of Asaf Benyamini.
Realize that you are not just experiencing a glitch in a broken system. You are experiencing a system performing exactly as intended. You are being stress tested by a cognitive DDoS attack.
Which leaves us with a final, vital question to consider, born directly from the tension in Asaf's own hopes and fears. Asaf dreams of a near future where technology bypasses this cruel red tape through compassionate automation.
AI that adapts to help the vulnerable. But as artificial intelligence is increasingly adopted by governments and corporations to manage their administrations, will it actually dismantle the human DDoS?
Or will it simply learn the rules of the bureaucracy, optimize them, and create an invisible algorithmic wall that is entirely flawless, making it permanently impossible for the disabled and the marginalized to ever break through?
From a jagged white line on an X-ray to a black box algorithm, the tools change, but the struggle for visibility remains. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of freedom and friction. We'll see you next time.